Ancestry.
Life's good.
Hey, it's Diane, and I'm your host of the Now What podcast. This is a follow-up, part 2, for episode 60, an Ancestry DNA story with Rhoena Johnson, where she shares her experience using Ancestry.com to learn her DNA results. In today's episode, we're going to continue the discussion with Rhoena as she shares what happens after she discovered her results. Don't forget to stay up to date on the latest episodes at Now What Radio. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, I ask that you share it with a friend and subscribe from wherever you're listening. Now let's get on to the show.
She didn't say that out loud, but I think that there was a lot of trying to figure out why didn't I stay?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that she came to a conclusion on that, or did you ultimately kind of come to a point of reconciliation to that question? Because that's a question that I'm sure a lot of children have, or young adults have, especially when they were given up from their families.
So I don't know. I can answer this in two ways. From my mother's perspective, I don't know that she has arrived at an answer for herself, right? For me, I was looking at the facts. I think I'm very black and white. I think I know why. But for her, I'm not so sure she has settled 100% on an answer.
Yeah. So what do you think the reason why was?
So, again, this is, my mom was born in 1945. And my grandmother was white and my grandfather was black. That was very bold, right? An interracial relationship, which produced a child. And I think in some states it probably was illegal. And they weren't married. I don't think my grandfather probably had any intention of marrying. I'm not sure. Neither one of them probably had an intention of marrying and continuing. I know that from what I have learned, that when she came home with the baby, my mother was very light. My mother's very light-skinned to this day. She can pass as white, but she had big curly hair. And I know the family was concerned about her darkening up, right? Is the baby going to darken up at 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, and them kind of hiding that fact.
Right.
And so for me, I know they were concerned about that. Financial, you got to think about the financial aspects back in 1945. My grandmother had already had one child. That marriage didn't work. The grandparents were raising that child. She came home with my mother with a second child, right? That relationship didn't work. And at the same time, my mother's grandmother was still having children.
Oh, okay.
Right? So she had my mother has an aunt that is roughly her age. And so, I'm sure they were thinking, how are we going to feed these mouths? How are we going to raise these children? And is our daughter going to come home with another baby and continue to drop them off? So, I think a lot of it has to do with the financial aspect of it.
Yeah.
My grandmother, I think when she had my mother, just wasn't mature enough, ready enough to raise a child. And then the whole dynamic of the race.
Right.
So for me, I think that's what answers it. My grandfather came and got her, and that solved that problem.
Yeah. So have you made contact with your aunts? And since then, do you guys keep in touch? And what was their reaction to, did they always know you were out there, or your mom was out there?
So the first child, her name is Dolores, and she knew my mom was out there. Dolores had to be, I'm going to guess, maybe she was 3 or 4 when my mom was born. And so you got to realize, remember when my mother came to live with her grandparents, they were like, this is your baby sister. And they spent a couple of years together. So Dolores remembered. And Dolores' story has a sad little part to it. So Dolores was at school. is my understanding. She was at school one day, and that was the day that my grandfather came and picked up my mother and took her. Mm-hmm. And when Dolores came home from school, she was like, well, where's my baby sister? And the family's like, what baby sister? They act like it didn't happen.
Oh, no.
Right? They just act like it didn't happen, and they never really talked about it again. Mm-hmm. And so for Dolores, it was... right? That does mind tricks to you. Am I crazy? Dolores is maybe the crazy one. Dolores is maybe making up stuff for attention. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the sad part. Dolores remembered that she had a sister, and she carried it with her whole life. The other children were in a relationship after the fact, and so they didn't know anything about it. So the 2 aunts I reached out to when I wrote the email, they had no idea. Now, I gather from listening, I have met everyone, that when Dolores would occasionally tell us, there's another one of us out there, and it was kind of taken tongue-in-cheek, I think, by the rest of the family, mm-hmm. like, yeah, but there was no evidence of it, and the mother never spoke about it. Mm-hmm. So the 2 ladies I reached out to were like, we need to talk to other family members, right?
Yeah. Wow, interesting. So what has been the biggest impact that this test has had on your life and any relationships, if any?
Well, I have met the family that I found on Ancestry.com, and I always tease them that they're the best family that my money could buy. And I mean that sincerely. Very fortunate, very lucky. Everybody is really fantastic. And there's a sadness that I think, gosh, I wish I could have known them my entire life. Mm-hmm. But then I quickly let that go, and I'm glad I found them, and I get to know them for the rest of my life. So it really is good. What else did you ask me? Sorry.
Oh, no, that was it. You answered it. So the other question I had is, how did finding out your results impact your perspectives on your heritage and culture?
Yeah, so it like I said, when I looked at my results and I saw how much white I had in me, it forced me to look at the self-biases that I had imposed on myself, mm-hmm. or that I allowed to be imposed on myself. And really a decision, right? A decision go forward, knowing what I know, stepping into the light, washing away all of those things that potentially are holding you back, that you're having negative self-talk about, and you don't even realize all the things that you're having negative self-talk about, but just going forward and being the best that you can be, and not buying into the hype of whatever it is.
Yeah. So what would be some good reasons for people to try Ancestry.com? I don't know why anyone would want to do it. That's a personal question. I can just tell you that for me, I wanted to know myself. I needed to know who I was. Mm-hmm. And what it has given me is perspective, right? Mm-hmm. It's giving me perspective and connectedness, I guess. Because when I start to think at it and I start to look at the world map of everywhere that my family comes from, it gets me out of just thinking, oh, I'm from Kansas, mm-hmm. from the United States. And I can look back and I can see Scandinavia, I can see, Ireland, I can see the countries in Africa. I feel more connected to the world, knowing, that, wow, this is so much bigger than just Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, which is where I was born, right? Yeah, for sure. So for anyone who's looking to understand more about their Ancestry.com results or waiting to receive them, what advice would you give to them?
I think that, I think information is power. And so I think you want to take the time to read how the test is conducted, how they determine really where you come from, how to read and interpret the information. I think that's the very first step before you get in there and make lots of assumptions. I wouldn't tell anybody that you're going to see, first of all, when you go in there, you're going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of relatives. It's just, it's funny because at some point you feel like you're connected to I'm related to the whole world, really. That's what it feels like it's going to. But, this whole journey with my mother, you see all these stories in the paper every day about a family that's done the test and who they thought was their parents or not their parents or their siblings. And some of them are good stories. Some of them are really terribly sad. I think that what I'd say is my mom's story is not unique, right? And I think it's always gone on through the whole age of man. I think that it will continue to go on. It's not like something that happened in the 1940s. I think it happens today. And I think people do the best that they can do in that moment, right? And that's what I kind of tell myself about my grandmother. I listened to her story, and she was so incredibly young. The age at which women get married, start having babies in 1940, incredibly young, not mature, not experienced. And so I think about her situation, and I just go, wow. I think people do the best that they can with the choices that they think they have at the time. And that's what I think you got to keep in mind.
And so what are you the most passionate or interested about in this season of your life?
That's a good question. I'm at a point where I'm redefining who I am. Earlier, I think in my adulthood, it was about accomplishments, right? Professional accomplishments, I'd say. Achieving, going, getting promoted, doing all these things. And now it's not that. It's really slowing down. It's learning more about a thing. It's asking questions. It's soaking it in. And it's about really, I'm starting to feel, not that I feel like I'm on death's door or anything. Like I said, I'm 47. I think I'm going to live another at least 50 years. But it's also starting to feel that my time is limited and it's precious. And I want to make sure that what I'm doing right now is something that's going to be worth my investment in my life. That's worth my life. Whatever I'm doing, if I'm showing up at your house, it's worth my life at this moment. And that if it's not worth my life at this moment, I'm just not doing it. So that's the redefining is redefining really what's important and what is my legacy.
Yeah. That's an important question, a difficult one that people often don't want to answer because it requires you to reflect, and kind of accept a lot of the things that we may not have done, the way we wanted to. But I think it's an important part of everyone's journey. So kudos to you for doing that.
I just wish I wish there's some sharp 20-year-olds out there. Let me say I've met them. That wasn't me, by the way. But I sure wish I would have realized that when I was 20. And really, what is your legacy? What is it you're going to leave behind long after you're gone? What does that look like? And even this weekend, I was telling you earlier, I was playing board games with my grandchildren. And That's kind of painful sometimes. Right?
Oh, yes. I'm glad that I wasn't the only one thinking that.
No. It's painful to sit down. They're 7 and they're 8, and my grandson wants to play Monopoly, and I'm like, oh no. So we started with the game Life, and at 8 years old, it's a game that lasts longer than, let's say, his patience, right? Before he wants to do something else. And telling him the rules and kind of going through it and knowing he's going to get upset if he's not winning and all this stuff. But it really wasn't about the game Life. It was about sitting there and listening to what he was thinking, making it all about him, right? Mm-hmm. That's what it was putting in the time, spending the time with him. It had nothing to do with the game of life. But to me, that's one where I said, this is my legacy and my grandson. Mm-hmm. But no, playing board games is a little painful, but the quality time with him.
Yep. Yeah. So you have 2 grandchildren now.
Yes.
Right. So what do you want them to know about you when you're gone, or what do you want them to remember about you? Or even when you're alive, like, what do you want them to know about you?
Oh, that's a good question. I just want them to know that they are capable of anything. Mm-hmm. I really do. I hope that they don't have any limits. I hope they don't set limits. And, it's funny, not funny, haha, but it's interesting. I see in them at 7 and 8 some of the things that they say, like, that's a girl color. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, there's no such thing as a girl color. Mm-hmm. Or my granddaughter might say, I can't do this. She'll say, I'm not strong like my brother. And I'm like, you're stronger than your brother. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Just the things that they're starting to tell themselves at this early age. I would like them to say, I remember my grandma doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah, of course. Rowena shares her story to inspire and encourage you to embrace who you are, seek to understand the lives of those who lived before you with compassion and love. This is the podcast, The Space, where we give a platform to honor and share our voices and stories. If you like what you heard today, continue on the conversation at nowwhatradio.com, and remember to support independent shows just like ours. And until next time, stay inspired.